Chapter 68. This wasn't the kind of story where slumber parties made sense. Our characters were bound together by having some connection to the diecast. Some of us had helped summon it. Others had merely witnessed it. Still, hanging out in a giant glass house together was probably not completely in character. It didn't matter. We needed it. Spending time alone in Carousel was grating, even with Carousel moving you forward days at a time. It was easy to get lonely even with so many unseen eyes on you. So we had our slumber party. My character's house was as good as any place we had stayed at. Antoine and Kimberly took the bedroom at Kimberly's request. It was all jokes when they asked for it, ha ha, have a good time, but really, the reason they needed the bedroom was so Antoine could get his past dose of you were having a nightmare. And there were smaller windows in the bedroom. Windows that could be covered. Otherwise, Antoine would be stuck in a giant terrarium staring at trees. I wasn't going to make him admit to anything, but I knew he was still haunted by his time in the straggler forest by more than just mental fatigue or panic attacks. I didn't know how haunted he was until that night. Bubby let his dogs sleep everywhere. They seemed to think we all wanted their attention. Cassie didn't seem to mind, but Ramona did. Isaac was awake with dread from his part in our plans most of the night until he took a whiskey lullaby. You can use Riley's sleeping trap, Antoine had offered. I'm good, Isaac said with obvious regret as he laid out in a t-shirt and shorts on the fainting couch. I could tell he wanted to take it, but he knew Antoine needed it more. Everyone did. It was hard to understand what Antoine was going through. The trap we used to keep his demons at bay was supposed to suppress memories down to barely remembered dreams. We thought that would quash them. The insider apparently had, too. It turned out that barely remembered dreams had their own toll. When I heard them talking, everyone had gone to sleep. My couch was above an air vent that connected to their room. Kimberly whispered something like, "No, we're not there anymore." "I don't want to open my eyes," he would respond. It's okay, you're in Riley's house, remember?" No response. "You're just having a nightmare," she would repeat over and over. "You're just having a nightmare." And he was. Carousel had warned or teased him about his secret, the one that, if it got out, would cause people to lose trust in him. As I lay on the couch, I could almost hear something in his voice. The way he whispered, the way Kimberly reassured him. The way he said a word over and over again. I couldn't tell what he was saying for the longest time. I felt something in my pocket. It wasn't really there. I wasn't even wearing the jacket Carousel had replaced my hoodie with. I felt something appear in the subspace we put our tropes in. It was my art like a light drop. Antoine had used it before but had woken up since then. Now, it had returned to me. I listened to see if they would say something. Whispers. I couldn't make them out. He was still awake. Maybe Kimberly would come up and ask for it. No dice. I got up from the couch and took the stairs down to the bedroom door. I had to step over one of Bobby's smaller dogs. It didn't pay me any mind. I knocked on the door, and Kimberly answered. Antoine was standing, looking out the cupboard window. There, with the door open, I heard the word he had been saying. Trees? No trees. No trees, he chanted like he was trying to convince himself. He was reaching out, caressing the blanket that had been thrown over the window. It seemed to comfort him. I handed her the sleeping trap and walked away without even making eye contact. No wonder Antoine had been kept off the board for most of the last month. He was having trouble none of us could understand. His trap made it feel like his time in the straggler forest had just been a nightmare. Alas, the cure was incomplete. What good was turning trauma into a mere nightmare when you were in the one place where nightmares were real? As I walked up the stairs to my couch, I realized what Antoine's secret was. I knew why his incapacitation indicator was flaring even when we were just relaxing. Antoine believed, on some level, that he was still stuck in that forest. And in a way, he was right. Early morning. Breakfast. Bobby's sunny-side-up eggs got turned into scrambled after a mishap with a jumping dog that caused him to break a yolk. I didn't mind. "Why do I have to leave?" Isaac asked. He was being a good sport, and I was making the best promises I could that we would protect him. "We need you as bait," I said. Carousel wasn't a place for sugarcoating. We needed Roderick Gray to use the flask to target one of us so that we could have the revelation that Gray was the guy behind the curtain. We knew he was, but our characters needed to know, too. No, I mean, why am I leaving the protection of greater numbers so that the police have the opportunity to arrest me and throw me in a cage? Why would my character do that? He asked. It was a good question. Carousel had prepped a subplot of Isaac getting arrested. We just needed an excuse to serve him up on a silver platter. "Maybe he's trying to skip town," Antwan said with a smile. His old confidence was back. His eyes were bright. His smile was wide. You could hardly tell he was struggling. I wasn't going to ask him about it. "I thought of that," I said. "The problem is that skipping town, while logical, will make the audience hate him." "Good point," Antwan said. Ramona tapped the table. "Explain that logic," she said. She was eating one of the grapefruit that my character must have bought while I was off the board. She had taken an interest in understanding everything about how stories worked. I was going to explain, but Kimberly got there first. "If a character abandons everyone like a coward, it gives the audience an excuse not to care if they die," she said, spelling out the word die. "Stop that, it's not funny," Isaac said. It wasn't, but he had been the one to start it after reacting poorly to the word earlier that morning. "And we're all on thin ice anyway, seeing as our characters summoned the killer," I added. I had a map of Carousel and the Carousel Atlas opened up on the table. "Which is why I think you should go directly to Roderick himself. Get some talking in. Really make him nervous. The meeting is in a public place, so he can't hurt you. If we're right about Carousel's plans or we're wrong, and Carousel likes our idea, then the cops will scoop you up right there in front of him. He sees you go to jail and thinks you'll rat on him. Recipe for a midpoint. I get put in a cage and accidentally strangled with dental floss," Isaac added. "That part's optional," I said. Gallows humor was more than just one of Isaac's tropes. It was a necessity when planning a friend's dance with destiny. "And then you guys save me," Isaac said. Antwan and I looked at each other, and he said, "I guess we could do that if we have time." "Don't joke about that part," Isaac said. He had been asking us to promise him his survival. We would not make that promise. We couldn't. We would try our best, but we could not promise. At some point in time, we would have no tricks left up our sleeves. "I can help keep you alive," Cassie said. With anguish. "Not if it starts to kill you, though," Isaac said. Cassie didn't respond. Cassie's anguish drop could kill her and it might not be enough to save Isaac. She could share his pain and injury. In a story as supernatural as this one, her psychic tropes would be at their strongest. She needed to be careful. Ramona sat back and took in the tension. She kept looking at me for some reason. I couldn't say why. I had been here long enough that I was used to these hard conversations. In a weird way, Ramona might have been the most normal person there. Tilde. "Clear out," I said. It was time for Isaac to set up his meeting with Roderick. Unnecessary personnel had to wait outside. Antwan and I were at the table. Our scenario was that we would get together to see if Roderick knew anything about the attack at the movie studio. Of course, it wasn't a conversation for the phone. Isaac would need to meet in person. "Action," I said. Nothing happened. I didn't have that ability. I just thought maybe Carousel would take things on screen for the phone call. It never did. It was just as well. We didn't necessarily want the audience to see us there. "What number do I dial?" Isaac asked. We didn't have Roderick's number memorized. I theorized it wouldn't matter, given that our characters should know it, and it wasn't a clue in a mystery that had to be earned. "Just dial something with intention," I said. He did. 867-5309, Isaac said as he dialed. I was surprised he didn't choose a 555 number. "It's ringing," he said. "It's on speaker." "We know," Angman said. "Riley?" Roderick Gray asked quickly when he picked up. "Was caller ID a thing in 1984? Isaac's eyes bulged. He looked at me like I might answer. I didn't. "No," he said. "It's Isaac. Riley's. In the shower." "Oh. I'm just calling because you see," he said, looking down at the notes he had made for him. "Have you seen the papers?" There was a pause. "I guess I haven't lately," Roderick said nervously. "Oh. I gotcha. I was thinking we might meet for lunch. To catch up." Another pause. "I don't see why we would need to do that," Roderick said. He was paranoid as ever. "There's something you need to know. Maybe we meet at the Italian bistro on South Kareem Avenue. ASAP. Trust me." A final pause as we waited to see if Carousel would go along with things. If he were wise and cautious, he would never agree. I didn't read that from him. I thought he would be paranoid and reckless. I was counting on it. "I'll have to see if I can make time," Roderick said. "Okay. Just know it's important," Isaac said. That might have been too much. "Will our friend, the director, be joining us?" He was talking about me. And there was the kicker. "No," Isaac said. "It's better he not come." "I see. I'll head there now," Roderick said. Bingo. I figured that Roderick might not want to go if he thought we were going to rat on him. I figured that maybe if Isaac implied I was untrustworthy, he would be curious enough to hear what Isaac had to say. Isaac's decent moxie was enough to sell it, even if Carousel might not have wanted it. Now, we needed to see how Carousel would respond. Isaac hung up. "Sorry, I don't know why I said you were in the shower." "Me neither," I said. The conversation wasn't on screen, so that meant Isaac and Roderick would probably summarize it when they met. "Let's get moving," Angman said. __. The Italian place on Kareem Avenue had no name, but that wasn't an oversight. It had several different menus and could serve as any kind of restaurant. We read about it in the atlas. When we got there, we sent Isaac ahead. He had memorized his talking points. He only needed to stick around long enough to look suspicious and then get arrested. I thought he could handle it. Of course, that was assuming that Carousel went along with our idea. It did. In a way, it did. But it had its own flavor to add. As Isaac was walking toward the cafe, I noticed that future Mayor Roderick Gray was already there. He wasn't alone. He was talking to a smiling, well-dressed black man wearing a period-appropriate mustache and a hairstyle that could not have been accomplished without pomade. I had never seen him before, but I knew he was at least part of the story. His name was Elliot Moonlight Morrow. Mayor Elliot Moonlight Morrow. His plot armor was 27, just like mine. His poster showed a silvery version of himself standing over his own axe-impaled body. It read simply, "Moonlight Morrow is the departed." Chapter 69. Carousel wanted Isaac in jail. We needed a way for our characters to find out that future Mayor Roderick Gray was instigating the recent diecast attacks. It seemed so straightforward. Let Isaac be captured, rescue him, regroup. As the current mayor walked down the sidewalk toward us, I immediately suspected it wouldn't be that simple. Moonlight Morrow was a paragon, the departed paragon, but in this story he was acting as a player, which was why he had the same plot armor as me. That made some sense. Advanced archetypes like the departed change the nature of the stories they enter. Detectives like Grace made things into murder mysteries. Monster hunters like Arthur made things into action-filled hunts. A story filled with spirituality like this one could have certainly been the result of some advanced archetype rearranging. Isaac, caught off guard, watched as Moonlight Morrow passed him. The paragon exchanged a wave with Roderick Gray as he walked away. It was only after he had moved on that Isaac's senses tingled with something amiss. He did a double take, his gaze darting first to Moonlight and then back to our hiding spot across the street. After Moonlight was done waving at him, Roderick Gray stopped smiling. He started to scowl. He was ever the sore loser. Isaac managed to get his bearings eventually because he moved forward and greeted Roderick just as planned. I tried keeping an eye on him as best I could, but I was distracted because our new ally, the Litrpg Paragon, had apparently spotted us and was making his way to us. I looked at his tropes. __. The other side changes the nature of death. Deceased characters in the story return as spirits in some form. He was the nicest guy. Buffs his moxie and increases the odds that NPCs will have positive feelings toward him before and after his death. Almost made it. Guarantees he survives the finale and ensures that he dies there. __. That added wrinkles. Every character returned as a ghost. That had to have been included for a reason, but what was it? I checked casting director. Elliot Moonlight Morrow, the well-liked new mayor of Carousel. He won the popular vote by a landslide, but due to his friendliness with the Geist family, there are those who believe he has unclean hands. We had chosen a table in a restaurant near the cafe where Isaac was meeting with Roderick. Moonlight found his way to us easily. As he entered, the other customers got excited to see their beloved mayor. It was a big deal. He smiled and greeted them all in kind. "Folks, I sure am glad to be able to see you here today, but I got to be about my business with these fine voters in the corner," he said. He gestured toward me, Ramona, Kimberly, Antoine, and Cassie. Bobby had stayed behind with his dogs. That way, if the die-cast targeted all of us, he would see its paw on the red wallpaper and would be able to call the restaurant and warn us. As Moonlight approached, he gestured for a patron at the restaurant to stand up. The man, who had been wolfing down on the bread bowl, stood. Moonlight grabbed the man's chair and whirled it around gracefully next to our booth so he could sit down. The NPC looked around, his mouth still full, as if he had no idea how to respond. He picked up his bread bowl and left. "I've been dying to meet you folks," Moonlight said. "The word around the neighborhood is that you have been cruising right along to the Centennial. That's mighty nice to hear." He then shook each of our hands individually. "Nice to meet you, young man. Are you taking things okay?" he asked Antoine. Antoine nodded his head, and Moonlight continued his handshakes and greetings. The only other person to whom he said anything differently was Ramona, to whom he said, "Nice to meet you again." When I shook his hand, I noticed that he wore a thin black cord tied around his ring finger, though I didn't find out why. "You've started heading to the finish line. That means it was my time to come out and play. It has been quite a while, hasn't it?" he asked, though that last part might have been a question for himself. "The other side," I said, reciting the name of his trop. "When we die here, we stick around. You lay it down straight, don't you? No small talk?" Moonlight asked. "That's the rule here. You die, the fight's not over. None of you are afraid of dying by this point, are you? That should be old hat to you by now. If Carousel had the Litrpg Paragon acting as a player, and gave it a trop to bring everyone back as ghosts, that wasn't a casual thing. It served some plot purpose. Carousel worked like a clock. That trop was a cog in the machine. What was its purpose? Ghosts get their power from moxie, I said, wasting no time. We shouldn't be using Isaac as bait. Moonlight looked over at Isaac, who was sitting down talking to Roderick Gray. You may be right. Comedian usually gets sent through the paces of playing a fool in this storyline. I guess he's going out with a cymbal crash. A darkly humorous death. Is that what Carousel cooked up? I nodded. Carousel planned it. We didn't exactly argue. Yeah, I said. You're going to tell us this story is a lot of player deaths. What normally happens during rebirth? Hold up, now, he said. First, you need to lay it all out for me. As a player, the script is silent as the grave. Tell me what I need to hear, and tell me what you know about our enemy in the flask. So we did. We told him everything we knew about the flask, the plot, future Mayor Gray, the plan with Isaac, and everything else. Moonlight looked over each of us individually and then Isaac. The conspirators get killed one by one until only the leads are left. Usually. Lot of death in this one. We need to come up with a plan. Luckily, I have some information about that magical Florida. He was interrupted as police sirens sounded down the street. Squad cars moved in. Police approached the cafe where Isaac was meeting with Roderick Gray. Everything was going according to plan. The old plan back when we didn't know how stoned this story was on players dying. Moonlight watched as they hauled away Isaac. He was calm, if slightly amused. His eyes had seen things. What kind of person would Carousel pick as the paragon of the dead? I could only imagine. A waitress brought him a coffee and a piece of pie. He thanked her warmly and didn't hesitate to indulge. Once Isaac was in the squad car, he continued. Cassie, you need to pretend to find out some information from your psychic connections. Do you understand how that works, dear? The psychic is our best source for relaying information to the audience since you have no scholar. I'll go ahead and tell you what you need to find. The flask needs to be drowned. Put it in running water. That will pause its power, but it will not shut it down for good. Nothing will. Of course, if you want the true ending, you need to act on this information at the proper time. I cannot tell you when that is. It is one of my few restrictions, you understand. He took a deep breath. Now, as for the afterlife. I don't know whether you all have been ghosts before, but this one is turbulent. The fighting doesn't stop at death. Now, I don't mean to presume, but you may want to rethink sending your comedian to the grave unless you think he can handle it. We weren't exactly planning on killing him. We were just using him as bait. I can go, Cassie said. I have a trap that might be able to save him and let me take his place. He looked her over with a sly smile. He was reading something on the red wallpaper. Hughes, Moonlight said. He was a Hughes, too. Was that young man your old man? Old man. Like my. Wait, yuck, Cassie said. He's my brother. My brother. I can save him. That wasn't a good idea. This was a story where having a psychic was an asset. I didn't have to say anything. Moonlight did. Cassie, dear, you are far too important to die this early. You have to go research some information so we can use it in this film we're making. Now, he said, looking to the rest of us. You said your plan was to rescue him before he died. We nodded. Well, let's give it a go. I am the mayor. I might be able to rustle up an opportunity, he said. We'll save getting to know each other for later. So that was Carousel's play. Push the story toward Isaac getting killed so that we would build a plan around it and then reveal that Isaac may have been the wrong person to die. Moonlight was vague about what the afterlife meant in this storyline. I did ask him one thing. Is this ghost world the same as the one from the first storyline? If I was going to be a ghost, I really hoped it wouldn't be like those ghosts we saw in the first storyline. He laughed. No, that was a different animal. This isn't a separate world like what you get with the lantern. He didn't elaborate. I couldn't press him. I had other things to deal with. There were 2 jails that Isaac could have been sent to that we could find in Carousel 1984. There was a city jail downtown that was older and smaller and more decrepit. Then, there was a proper jail in Southeast Carousel. We wanted a downtown jail. Not only did it have no fence, it was absurdly designed. I had not seen a jail like this one outside of movies set many decades before I was born. The jail cells were in the basement, with barred windows close to the streets. From those basement windows, inmates could yell at people walking down the street from their cells, and those passing by outside could toss contraband inside the jail. If I didn't know for certain that jails like these existed, I would have thought they were an artifact of movies. That was the major reason we planned the meeting as close as possible to downtown. We hoped that the nearer the jail, the more likely it would be chosen. We just had to wait until Isaac ended up in one of the cells. That had been our plan. We were going to attach a chain to the back of Roderick Gray's car. He still didn't know Isaac and Ant 1 had taken it and pull out the bars. Grab Isaac and get away using our superior stats over the NPCs. Ridiculous, but by movie standards, it was doable. When fighting horror movie monsters, crime got a pass. It would make a good scene, too. Cassie would come to us with a premonition. "If it's going after him, then it will go after all of us," she would say. We would decide to help. We were bonded by our relationship to the diecast, after all. We would get in and out quickly. Isaac would act humorously. As a comedian, he would lend legitimacy to our plan, which required humor to pull off. Carousel should have liked it. We were playing along, improvising. It should have worked. But it had other plans. It wanted a little more effort on our part. To our credit, Isaac was brought to the jail we wanted him in. The only problem was that when we arrived, we saw the barricades. Large stone structures had been installed near the building. They were cylindrical and strategically positioned to block access to the road we needed to drive down to get the car close enough to pull off our plan. "These weren't here," Cassie said. How could this happen? She wasn't really asking how it happened. She was just realizing that things would be harder than we initially intended. I let her vent. Carousel does not half-ass things, Ant-Man said. Coffee shops, a donut place, a nail salon, cobblestone. It changed everything. The side road next to the jail downtown was always near shops, but they were blocks away. Now, the building next door, which had been some kind of business park, was filled with shops that attracted pedestrians and warranted the cylinders to stop vehicles. There were too many pedestrians. Our plan A was ruined. Fortunately, thanks to moonlight, we now had a plan B. We walked down the cobblestone road to where the barred windows had been. They were still there. Isaac had been moved to the cell already, which seemed quick, but time was weird in Carousel. "What the hell?" he yelled. "When did those columns get put in?" he asked, standing on his tiptoes so he could see out of the window. "There's one in the flower bed." Carousel had indeed put one in a flower bed and another in the middle of the sidewalk. It was literally impossible to get a car anywhere near the jail window. Isaac was scared. He knew that this was a death sentence. "We're going to get you," I said. Please, he said. I felt stupid and powerless. Carousel had been so incredibly petty. I thought this was one of its little games, like when it gave me a goatee or when it gave the diecast that puff drop because I had mentioned it. This wasn't a game, though. If we had done things Isaac's way, we might have prevented him from being arrested at all. It wouldn't have worked. If Carousel wanted Isaac in jail, it would put him there. We could have at least tried to hide him. Instead, I insisted that giving Carousel its best story was worth the risk. I had no idea how death-centric this story was. Now, he was going to pay the price. He was a sitting duck. Unless I could do something about it. Chapter 70. I like to read the Carousel Atlas when I wasn't doing anything else. I had brought it with me during our month-long holiday as we portrayed our characters' lives. The knowledge inside was always qualified with disclaimers. No matter how much our predecessors knew about Carousel, they never really believed they knew anything. The history of the book was marked with change. Rules that had been placed inside the book years earlier were liable to be crossed out, with long explanations of why the rule was not true and what the true rule was. C.W. usually did it, Curtis. He was a doctor archetype who left entries on any number of subjects, but especially advanced archetypes. He collected them like trading cards. He had advice for monster hunters and adventurers, witch doctors, and mad scientists, and half a dozen others, which had such minuscule use cases that I was surprised to find out they were real. He had been something called a death negotiator, which could have you bargaining with serial killers, demons, or even fate itself. He had a rare one called child psychologist, which only had 5 tropes as far as he could tell. His notes were always very clear, technical, and somehow sentimental. Having read his journal entries, I felt like I knew him. He had been there in the midst of Project Rewind's formulation and had taken himself off the board to ensure its success, or, should I say, put himself on the missing poster board. His entries were a delight to find, like getting a letter from an old friend. He had written a funny anecdote on a piece of notebook paper and taped it in the entry for the final straw storyline. It claimed to have no spoilers, so I read it. The enemy of the storyline, Benny the Haunted Scarecrow, had apparently handed him the glasses that he had dropped. He said it was like an episode of Scooby-Doo. He thought Carousel was setting up a joke scene, so he put on the glasses and acted shocked to see Benny, but then he realized the whole interaction was off-screen. Having had my own interactions with Benny, I could picture the whole thing in my mind. CW had written an entry in the improvisation section entitled "The Limits of Improvisation." I read it hungrily, as the subject matter and the author both interested me. The article contained several ideas I liked to consider, one of which was his assertion that he believed the audience knew what we were going through. I had thought about that myself. How much did the audience know? If they knew everything about our suffering, that was interesting. If they knew nothing, that was somehow even more interesting. No one believed the audience was completely unwitting, but thinking of these amorphous, all-powerful judges who watch us as actual people made my mind spin. What were their lives like? Who were they? Were they the people I had seen in the theater when I died, thanks to Death Watch? In his essay, he outlined the 5 principles he believed Carousel took into consideration when deciding if your improvisation would make it into the final cut. While he said it much more eloquently, he believed Carousel wanted to 1. Entertain the audience, 2. Challenge players, 3. Keep the story coherent, 4. Engage players' minds, and 5. Preserve key story elements. Those points lined up with my experience. He also identified a secret 6th principle. The secret principle was this: sometimes, Carousel just wants the win. He didn't elaborate on that. As we scoped out the jail, finding dead end after dead end in our plans for getting Isaac out, I thought about that secret 6th principle. We sat in one of the coffee shops across from the small jail downtown where Isaac was being held. Antoine was getting in the groove, belting out ideas. Most of them were incomplete or impractical in the time we had. One was theoretically workable, at least in a movie. It wasn't an option, but I had to believe it could work under different circumstances. Until Carousel rubbed our noses in it. We could get cop uniforms and sneak him out ourselves, he said. 5 minutes later, a cop with a mustard stain on his uniform came in and, when speaking with the barista about the stain, said the laundromat that the city contracted with to clean their uniforms had burned down. All of their spare uniforms had gone up in flames. Ha ha. Very funny. Carousel wanted the win. It wanted Isaac. After its stunt renovating the street to thwart our plans, I was sure of it. Or maybe it just did not want a jailbreak. Maybe there was no way it would let one into its movie. It would disrupt the pacing, after all. Jailbreaks need to be set up in some way. We had none. It was also an odd tone for a movie about relentless death, even a campy one. This was a simple scene. One of our own was to die. It wasn't supposed to be climactic or clever. It wasn't supposed to be the moment we came together as allies. Our characters were mostly not good people. Why would they try to rescue Isaac's character? A rescue at a police station was something the brothers might do on Supernatural, but Isaac's character wasn't family or even strongly linked to the group. I could feel the creative juices in my mind start to slow as I came to the realization that Carousel was not going to give him up. It never was. Isaac had sealed his fate already by giving in to Carousel's nudging. He had played the unlikable stooge who got bitten by bad luck. He had already whacked his face on every rung as he fell down the metaphorical ladder. The only stop left was the bottom. He was a comedian, sure, but not a lovable jokester. That had been his path out of the line of fire. He could have made the audience like him for being funny. He could have embarked on a character arc that would lead to his being saved by allies. Instead, he had played up his unlikable qualities. The debt collector was a test. Just like my potential bad luck with the razor was a test. I had passed mine. He hadn't. He punched the man he owed money to in the face and set up his eventual, somewhat humorous death. Carousel was going to ensure this fate no matter what we had done. Even if we had locked Isaac in the basement, I doubted he would be safe. The sun went down, and the night came upon us. Cassie panicked as she realized it would be showtime soon. and all we had was the first part of a plan. Moonlight Morrow was going to visit the jail and play nice with the police. He was the mayor, after all. He could walk into any government building, and a story would form around him. He seemed confident enough in his ability to make a distraction. He was also very quiet about our hopes to save Isaac. That had been telling. We left the coffee shop and moved to where we would start the scene. We knew the time was soon. The NPC who owned the coffee shop told us the place closed at 6:38 p.m., right at sundown, which was a standard NPC nudge. I had to return Ramona to my character's house. Kimberly and I would be at the production lot working on some voice corrections. She was going to scream into the microphone so we could get good audio for her screams. Antoine and Cassie would be together. They would drive and get us when Cassie started having visions of Isaac's impending doom. We would drive to the jail to try to save him. It would be the first time our characters had been to the jail. The clock ticked. It felt like everything was slowing down. It was dark outside. Kimberly and I were working with an audio engineer who showed up just as we got to the production lot. Bobby tagged along and started filling out some insurance stuff related to the set disaster. We needed to keep him injected into the story for later. A screen appeared on the red wallpaper. It started out staticky, but then the view was clear. I was seeing the enemy's POV. Action. ~~. On screen. Kimberly screamed as loud as she could. It was her scared scream. She was watching footage of her scream in the movie, trying to match up her mouth movement. We were re-recording it. Tires squealed in the parking lot. What was that? I said. I pushed an intercom button. Go ahead and stop, Kimberly. It sounds like someone raising hell out there, the audio engineer said. We sat in a booth in a small building where the recording equipment was. Kimberly was in a soundproof chamber, screaming like a serial killer was attacking her. They had apparently neglected to soundproof the audio booth itself, though, because I could hear yelling outside. I waved at Kimberly through the glass window that separated us, gesturing that I was going outside. She took off her headphones and followed. I recognized the vehicle immediately. It was Antoine and Cassie in Roderick Gray's brown car. I had expected a phone call. We had a telephone in the booth. This worked too. As soon as I saw it was them, I looked at Kimberly. We pretended to be worried. Not these people. Our characters knew that their arrival meant the worst. Not again, Kimberly said. I gave a poignant pause. My character knew we weren't getting off that easy. They had witnessed the destruction of the diecast as it killed Carlisle Geist. It wasn't over. A security guard chased them down from the entrance of the lot a few lots away. Antoine had somehow gotten past the barrier gate arm that kept cars from entering without breaking it. At a glance, I would guess he had reached up and pressed the green button that opened the entrance and then driven in. Since this was a movie, he wasn't shot for it. "They're okay," I said to the guard. "We'll take care of it." "It isn't visiting hours," the guard yelled. I got close to him and whispered, "This is the guy who's a crucial witness with that lawsuit the guys are involved with from last year. Let's not give him any trouble. You understand? I'll escort him off the property." I knew there was a settlement from Gail Zaragoza's death. That had been established. I didn't know if the audience would hear me, but if they did, it would sound like my character made up an excuse on the fly. The guard looked at me and then at Antoine, then back to me, and nodded. He returned to his post. "What's going on?" I yelled at Antoine. "Tell me he's not back." My character wasn't as directly involved in the efforts to stop the diecast. That was Cassie and Antoine. I figured my character would hope it would all go away. He would still be reactive. The last thing the audience knew, we had all escaped the diecast and met with Madame Celia. What happened after that was mostly off-screen. "He is back," Cassie screamed. I looked in the car. "Where's Isaac?" I said. Cassie looked at me intensely. "He's next." "Oh, God," I said. "Don't tell me." I thought it was going after Geist still. Why would it attack one of us? Heck, I was starting to think it was all over, that maybe it would just disappear. Cassie shook her head. I don't understand it either. I just know he's next. I was researching the spirit of vengeance. The spirit shouldn't be strong enough to manifest on its own yet. It should still need to be summoned. If it's gotten strong enough to rise on its own and attack us, we may be too late. Are you sure he's this way? Kimberly asked as Antoine gunned the engine. We hadn't thoroughly explained why Kimberly would come with us, but I didn't think we had to. As I had found before, once you have a team of characters, they tend to stick together even if they would head for the hills in real life. Her character had seen the die-cast and was willing to help stop it. She was the only innocent among us. That meant a lot in a story. I'm sure this is the way, Cassie said. We were all sure. We could see the die-cast spoof as it slowly walked downtown from its grave. Bobby had not come with us. He was the least connected to the group, and there wasn't room in the car. He did watch us pull out of the lot, though. He needed to be preserved for the Manor Blaze, anyway. His character actually knew some of the guys. He's downtown? I asked incredulously. Stop asking, Cassie said. Take a left here. Antoine pulled the car right up to the metal barricade that blocked off the street near the police station. We jumped out of the car. We didn't need it. Cassie ran, and the rest of us followed. We arrived at the basement window where Isaac stood, slumped up against the window ledge, his arms dangling out the window. Isaac Hughes, you've doomed yourself, Cassie said as she saw him. What are you doing in jail? I asked. When you left my place, you said you were going to grab a bite to eat, and then you disappeared. It's not my fault, Isaac said. It's the bad luck demon guy. That's why I'm here. Bad luck. We all looked at each other as we stood near the jail window. How exactly did bad luck end you up in jail? Antoine asked. I punched a guy, and a cop was walking by, he said. What are the odds? We collectively groaned. Was Isaac playing his character as a plucky, unlucky sidekick who gets saved, or as a jinx who gets the worst of everything and dies with the punchline? I had to be honest. His character had no redemption arc. My character was unlikable, but even so, trying to save Carlisle Geist and having instant remorse was something. Isaac didn't have that. I was glad I hadn't promised Isaac we would save him. It wasn't looking good. I wasn't sure if the others had realized it yet. I did promise, however, that I would try to save him. As Cassie explained that the die-cast was on his way, I saw Moonlight Morrow walking toward the police station. Isaac's panic and dread were palpable. He didn't have to pretend. I can't die here, he said. What am I supposed to do? I knelt down next to Cassie, got close to Isaac's face, and said, I'm always here for you, buddy, I said solemnly. Grasping onto his hand like we were going to arm wrestle, I gripped tight, a gesture of friendship. Everything's going to be okay. I looked him in the eye. The only way we were going to save him now was to make the audience care about him. If I was right, our connections as co-conspirators were not strong enough to do this. I needed to show I cared about him, that we were old friends. We hadn't established that. The odds were against us. Even if we managed to improvise our way down to him. Even if we were exceedingly clever. Even if it made the story better and checked every box on Carousel's improvisation principles, we might still not be able to save him. Carousel might just want the win. Chapter 71. This wasn't a heist movie. There would be no rappelling down from the ceiling to get past a laser beam security system. We weren't going to grift our way past the 5 or so police officers in the building. We wouldn't replace Isaac with a holographic replica. But we weren't without options. The jail was small. There was an office of sorts with a uniformed officer at reception. There were desks for the officers, an interrogation room, and an entire room devoted to phone banks and vending machines. Downstairs, the cells were lined up one by one, with each of them getting their little window. Isaac said there were a lot of cells and some of them were behind a large steel door that no one walked through. Everything in the place had a fresh coat of white, rubbery-looking paint. Without that, the place looked old both inside and out, and it smelled old. If I had seen this place back in the real world, I would have thought it was in some sparsely populated panhandle town. That's just what we could see through the windows. Knowing how Carousel worked, this place had probably come from the historic downtown of some sinister little haunted world. It fit in the patchwork of the Carousel downtown well enough from the outside. We had to get through a door with an electric lock that the receptionist would buzz you through, find the keys to Isaac's cell, and get him up the stairs and out. And that was just the first set of problems. This wasn't a heist movie or a crime thriller. It was a horror movie, and as we took our last few moments to prepare, the horror showed up. It started with a man screaming. The die-cast must have gotten powerful enough that it was targeting anyone and everyone. The barista from across the street, who had just recently closed the shop down, came out of his shop followed by a waft of steam. His face was boiled red. He clutched at it as he screamed. It looked like there had been a terrible accident. "It's almost here," I said. "We have to move." And that was about as far as we got. Whoever said failure wasn't an option had never been to Carousel. We had a plan. It never even got off the ground. Carousel had a plan too. I had to admit, it wasn't bad. It used us. I couldn't even say whether things would have happened this way had we not tried to break Isaac out. The first thing I did was go to the station's entrance. The others stayed back. We didn't need lots of people. I had good hustle and moxie, and that was what was needed to make this work. I noticed that Moonlight Morrow was standing in the waiting room, giving a rousing speech to the officers. There wasn't much room, so they propped open the electric lock door, and a couple of officers were standing behind it, hanging on Moonlight's words. They really did seem to like him. His tropes and high moxie probably had something to do with it, but more than that, Moonlight had a captivating way of speaking. It was so captivating that when the alarm started going off on the electric door because they had held it open too long, one of the officers on the other side of it reached up and unplugged a small wire at the top of the door. That was where the problem started. Moonlight ended his speech with a wave and told them to keep doing their jobs to keep Carousel safe. Even in character, he knew how much irony was in that statement. Carousel was never safe. The officers waved him goodbye, and he left. He moved off screen as he walked out the door. He reached out and grabbed my shoulder. Before I could question why he didn't make the distraction we were expecting him to, he said, "It just isn't in the cards today, my friend. They wouldn't even let me in the room. Carousel is putting its foot down and we best not be under it." "Isaac's still in there," I said. "His death should not be guaranteed. This isn't second blood yet." "Come on now, you're lying to yourself," Moonlight said. "Nothing guaranteed about it. Young Mr. Hughes sealed his own fate already. He had every choice, and there ain't nothing you can do about that." In the back of my mind, I heard the barista still crying. A car crash had happened in the distance, but all I could focus on was my own heartbeat. I felt the dark aura of the diecast. I didn't care. I should have prepared Isaac better. He punched the guy on screen? He had to have known there would be consequences even if the guy he punched was a debt collector. Spoiled rich heirs like his character were on a tight leash in a story like this. They were below debt collectors in the pecking order. I was enraged. How was he supposed to recover from that on top of all the other marks against his character? The audience was going to enjoy watching Isaac get his comeuppance. I was an idiot to think I could prevent it. Maybe if we had hidden him away instead of serving him up to the police to try to take the initiative from Carousel. I couldn't think about it. If we weren't going to save Isaac, there was still something else we could do. "You said the battle continues after death," I asked. "I did," Moonlight said. "I'll be there late." "You think Mr. Hughes is ready to see the other side and help win the day?" I didn't. "I will see you in the finale one way or the other, my friend," Moonlight said. He started to walk away, but then he turned around and said, "Remember, dying ain't the worst part, Mr. Lawrence. It's the waiting around that really kills you." He gave a wink and walked off into the descending night. As he did, I heard banging coming from inside the building. I looked in through the glass door and saw what Carousel was up to. The plug that the police officer had unhooked had gotten caught in the door when it closed and was hanging out the other side. The officer in the reception area was desperately smashing the unlock button, but, of course, it couldn't work because someone on the inside had unplugged it. The officers rammed the electric door, but it held firm. Somewhere inside, I heard sloshing. I heard water coming down the stairs. I ran around to the side of the building where Isaac's cell window was. "What the fuck is going on?" he screamed. He was spooked. The idiot cop handcuffed a guy to the water pipe for some reason, and he broke the damn thing. "It's flooding in here." "I can't get inside," I said. "The door is jammed shut. The officers can't bust it down." "What do we do?" Isaac asked desperately. I looked around. I needed a plan. What was all of this savvy for if I couldn't come up with a plan to use it on? Past Isaac, the water rose faster than it could in real life. That was movie magic. "Keep your head out and keep breathing," I said. As long as he had the window, he couldn't drown unless he exhausted himself. "I'll be right back. Maybe if I got a large pipe, I could pry the bars apart." No. That wasn't a real plan in the sense that savvy would help it work. That was something you needed metal for. Heck, that was something you needed a bruiser for. Maybe two of them. I ran around the building as fast as I could. I kept my inner eye firmly planted on the pop of the die-cast to make sure I wasn't running into it. I had a pretty good idea of where it was. It wasn't moving. My worry was that it could come up to Isaac and kill him if he was sticking his head out for a breath, but the die-cast was standing still, its view steady on the police station. If it wasn't going to kill him physically, then what was the plan? I didn't see anything that could help. I thought I might try to steal a police car and ram the building, but the cars were gone. They had been parked there previously on the side of the building opposite Isaac's window, but they were gone now. Carousel really saw me coming. I spotted the brown car with Antoine, Kimberly, and Cassie in the distance. Antoine flashed the lights at me. I ran over to them. Since I was off-screen, I didn't need to look cool or calm, and I certainly wasn't going to look collected. When I got to them, Cassie was already out of the car and looking at me. "Where's Isaac?" "Cassie," I said. I couldn't think of the right way to let her down easy. "No," she said. "Why didn't you get him?" "It's not happening," I said. "The door is locked down. Not even the cops could get out. There was no back door because, of course, there wasn't." "The die-cast isn't moving," she said. "Does that mean there is something you are supposed to be doing?" "The basement is flooding," I said. Her eyes widened. "I can breathe for him," she said. She wanted to use her anguished drop to share his injuries. That would work for a time, but only a time. "No," I said. "Cassie, all you will do is kill yourself, too. This is bad luck. We have to get to the end of the story to help him. We can't just give up," she said, crying. "I'm not giving up," I said. "You guys have to go. I'll take things from here." Antoine and Kimberly had gotten out of the car and were trying to help Cassie. I looked at them. I knew what I needed to do. "Listen to everything I am about to say," I said. "It's not going to make much sense, just listen." They waited for me. "You had better run. Hide now. Follow my voice. It's time to fight. I'm here with you. Don't be afraid." "It's coming," I said. Each phrase, I said slowly and deliberately with pauses in between. They didn't make sense all spoken together, but I needed to have said them for later. I had been thinking about this for some time. "What are you talking about?" Cassie asked. I took a deep breath and looked back at Kimberly and Antoine. They understood what I was doing. "It's all up to you now," I said. Then I ran back to Isaac. It wasn't too late, but the water was already pouring out of the window. He was floundering in some impossible turbulence in the water. "Did you get something?" he asked. He was swimming now instead of standing. "I'm good here," he said. "I can hold to the bars. You just have to get inside and find the keys." On screen. I jumped down to the ground, splashing in the water. I grabbed Isaac's hands and arms and held onto him firm. "Don't give up," I said. "Keep swimming. I've got you. I know you're tired. I'll hold you. Just keep going until help gets here." Isaac looked at me curiously. He wasn't that tired. Not yet. He could hold himself to the bars for a while longer, or at least he thought. I had realized Carousel's plans, however, and I knew what was actually going on. He wasn't going to hang in there for much longer. I pulled at the bars pathetically but with as much desperation as I could convey. The water surged, covering much of the window and pouring all over me. Carousel had accepted my small contribution. Isaac began spitting water. "Go," he said. "Get help." But there was no help to get. Isaac was going to die. He wasn't going to drown, though. I had figured that out already. I held him up so he could get little sips of air despite the surging water. He was going free. I looked past him at the light in the center of the room. It was wet and almost submerged. In movies, water is the perfect conductor of electricity, even more so than in real life. I reached back over Isaac's arms and said, "I got you. Just breathe." "I'm okay." "Oh, God!" I screamed. The water hit the light fixture, and the room got bright. Suddenly I was watching myself convulse on the ground. The electricity killed me so quickly that I was on death watch in the mysterious theater before my body stopped twitching. Isaac was dead, too, of course. The pop of the diecast took over as it turned to leave. Next, the scene changed to Antoine, Kimberly, and Cassie driving away from the jailhouse. Antoine looked intense. From the angle of the shot, they had just seen Roderick Gray, so their characters could realize he was behind the attack, and it wasn't just the die-cast going AWOL. Cassie was sobbing. Kimberly was in the back seat with her, comforting her. Cassie was crying because her brother was dead. Why was her character crying? Perhaps having seen the consequences of selling black magic to creeps. That was good, even if these tears expressed the wrong kind of sadness for that. I wanted to use flashback revelation to let them know that I was watching, but I didn't. That trap had limited uses, and I didn't know how limited. I needed to save my advice for when it really mattered. Before I died, I had given a few cant phrases to the others in anticipation of Death Watch. As before, I started straining my eyes to the left and then the right. I could see theater seats in front of me, but none of them had people in them. The people who had clapped at the conclusion of previous movies were never in my line of sight. It was useless. I couldn't will myself to look at anything but the screen. Something strange happened as the scene of them driving away ended. I saw everything go dark, not just on the screen but throughout my vision. Then, there was a white light, which dimmed like a light bulb bursting. Then I could see again, but the theater screen was not showing the movie. It showed a dozen different shots of different exteriors, interiors, and sets from the story we were in, all laid out in separate squares on the screen. I saw the burned remains of the movie set. I saw the flooded jail that was being drained by NPCs at that moment. I saw Antoine and the others driving wordlessly from several angles. Everyone was off-screen. Usually, with Death Watch, I couldn't see anything but what might end up in the final movie. It was always on screen. I was watching them in a dozen other camera angles off-screen, including the die-cast puff. And then I realized that I wasn't restricted anymore. I could look around. I put my hand in front of my face out of reflex. I could move. I was free. For the first time, I could see the people who had been with me in the theater. I just had to look. The thought of it thrilled me and terrified me in equal parts. Who were those people in the theater with me? I turned to look. To my surprise, the thing I saw first was the last thing I could ever expect. I saw my dead face. My eyes were open, but I was dead. My head was slumped over. I stood up immediately and screamed. What I saw was my own dead corpse sitting in a theater seat with a lanyard around its neck. I was so shocked to see it that I couldn't look at anything else for a time. I backed away and found myself falling. I didn't hit the row of seats in front of me. I passed right through them and fell onto the ground in front of them. I had phased through solid matter. I stood up and looked at my body more. I looked at my hands again. They looked normal. I reached out and touched the seat I had just passed through. Sure enough, my hand went right through. I was a spirit. My first thought was something about astral projection, but that was unlikely as my body was not asleep. It was dead. I was dead. It took longer than I would have liked to admit for me to remember why this was happening. Moonlight Moro. He had a trap that made every character who died turn into a ghost. It must have activated as soon as the scene at the jail ended. I wasn't just dead. I was a ghost. Something about my Death Watch trap, combined with his afterlife trap, had caused this. I knew that when I sat in the theater seat to watch the movie play out, it felt real. It felt like I was really there. I could never have anticipated how real it was. The shock of my mundane afterlife distracted me enough that I didn't notice something strange about the theater at first. While it looked normal when you faced the front, looking back was odd. It wasn't a full theater. The room was the right size, more or less, but the back half of the seating area wasn't there. Instead, there was a large flat floor with a door in the back. This was a mock-up, a set designed for the film buff's version of Death Watch, nothing more. It was built for me to watch the movie when I died, or maybe it was built for more than just film buffs. The floor was empty. No one was there watching, but as I looked around, the door in the back of the room opened, and a woman walked through. She was dressed fancy, but I couldn't place the style. It looked old, professional, odd. If she could see me, she didn't show it. She walked down the aisle my body was on and stopped, leaning over me. With a hand, she brushed my hair out of my face and closed my eyes. She was sad, tired, and stressed. The red wallpaper was off. I couldn't even see it. The woman grabbed a ticket attached to the lanyard around my neck and produced a small, silver object out of nowhere. As she held the object toward the ticket, I realized it was one of those hole punchers that ticket inspectors used on trains. I tried reading the ticket, but the only thing I could read was the word disillusion, which would later assume was a pun. She placed the hole punch over the word and clicked it, causing a small hole to appear in the ticket. As it did, my body disappeared. No explosion. Not dust. Nothing at all. It was just gone. Soon, so was I. I was floating, picking up speed. I rose so fast I was out of the room in the blink of an eye. I saw a blur of violet light, a lake at sunset, trees zooming by, and I heard children singing. In an instant, I was lying on the ground next to my body, my real body. EMTs were walking around surveying the damage. They couldn't see me. Luckily, I could see myself on the red wallpaper again. Dead, as expected. I sat there for a while before I went to find Isaac, digesting what I had just seen. That was the first time I would see one, the special little workers who helped administer so much pain to us players. I knew they existed, the people who worked behind the scenes. I had seen signs, strange phrasings and trap text, and odd comments on the script that were clearly written by and for someone other than the players. I had wondered who the people had been to clap at the end of a storyline somewhere just out of my view. I thought it might have been the audience, that they were there to watch the show. Instead, it must have been more people like her, people who were only clapping to congratulate themselves. It was them. Chapter 72. 2 Bodies. I had died twice in less than a few minutes. First, I got electrocuted. I couldn't blame anyone but myself for that one. Moonlight Moro said we needed people to man the ghostly defense and I answered the call. Second, I got placed in another body and propped up in a theater. That body died of something. Magic? Evil? Convenience? And suddenly, I was a ghost. I had to sit and think through everything I had just experienced even to comprehend it. My body, my real body, was still smoking when a bunch of NPCs started to haul it away. That whole ordeal made me feel so small and powerless. Knowing that these people, if they could be called people, were so powerful that they could casually create a new body for me to use while on Death Watch. Even after having died and come back, having been injured and healed, seeing the cold, casual way in which our captors wielded enormous power shook me to my core. But I didn't have time to shake for long. Isaac was still standing in the rapidly draining jail cell, watching his body sink further and further down toward the ground. I walked to the jail cell window and crouched down. "You coming with me?" I asked. He didn't answer, but he did walk over to the window. Now, for the test, could ghosts touch each other? My movie-watching experience said yes. I reached in toward him with my hand. He reached out and grabbed it. It felt not normal, but not that strange. Instead of feeling his hand properly, I felt a tingling sensation along with it. I pulled, and he rose up through the cell bars as if they were made of smoke. Soon, he was standing next to me on the ground. He looked around. "It's weird out here," he said solemnly. I followed his gaze. All around us, we saw nothing but whiteness. White fog banks covered everything. It was bright, too, almost uncomfortably bright. "Come on," I said. "We still have a job to do." The fog banks blocked us from going anywhere we wanted. In fact, they only showed us one path. Out of curiosity, I tried to defy Carousel's prodding and walked into one of the white, bright clouds that prevented me from crossing the street. I couldn't pass through it. This was how Carousel must have controlled departed during their dead walks. "So I guess we really died," Isaac said. Kind of a belated revelation, but I couldn't blame him for having a hard time with it. If I wasn't trying to look tough like I thought I ought to, I might have been just as dazed. I had something to focus on. I had a goal. There was a reason that this scene had existed, after all. Isaac's death had a purpose in the narrative. Well, our deaths. This death was supposed to reveal information about our enemy. Not the diecast, but Roderick Gray. It just so happened that I knew where Roderick was. When I saw all of the off-screen cameras back in the theater, I saw him sitting on a wooden bench a few blocks from the jail. When I saw the direction the path in the fog banks led us, I knew where Carousel was leading us. It had an idea for the story. On screen. I was caught off guard. I hadn't thought about how we were supposed to act once dead. Surely, Carousel didn't want us to do the whole in denial of death thing. That was tiresome. I went a different route. Serene acknowledgement. We were going to play it as if we understood what had happened to us. We would know we were dead and we were at peace with it. That should cut out a lot of the melodrama. "Hey," I said. "It's Roderick." Isaac followed my gaze. He didn't say anything. He just took a deep breath. "What are the odds that he just happened to be a few blocks away when that thing attacked you?" I asked. Thankfully, Isaac understood his role in the conversation. "He was there when I got arrested," Isaac said. "He was acting strange. At the time, I thought he was just nervous, but now, I think it was more than that." I laughed. Being dead is strange. It's like when you think of a good comeback in the shower, except it's with everything. Suddenly, my whole life is in perspective. He nodded as we walked along toward Roderick. "I'm starting to think I was the one who was wrong a whole lot more than I knew before. I think I was kind of a jerk," he said. I wondered if he was just saying that or if he actually had figured out why his character was killed. The whole putting life into perspective thing wasn't just something I was doing because I thought it would work well for the story. It was real. Even as we walked along our vibrant path toward the future mayor, things started jumping out at me. Realizations I never made in life danced around in front of me, memories, fears, and long-lost dreams. I almost choked up. I had to force myself not to think back to my years growing up or my way of relating to people. I had a job to do. "What is that? Is that the flask?" I asked, pointing at the object Roderick had sitting next to him on the bench. "No," Isaac said. He said he got rid of it. We got closer and saw the look of regret on Roderick's face. He looked ashamed. Maybe even sad. "There's smoke coming out of the flask," I said. "That can't be," Isaac said, walking closer and observing the flask. "That would mean—" I sat down on the bench next to Roderick as I pretended to have a wave of disbelief move over me. The bench held my weight, just as the ground did. Ghost movies were funny like that. The seat of your pants and the soles of your shoes were not intangible, it would seem. That means he did this, I said. It wasn't just the spirit going out of control. He sent it after you. Isaac screamed in Roderick's face, but the man did not see or hear anything. We were ghosts. He wasn't. I'm going to haunt him until he dies, and then I'm going to kick his ass, Isaac said. No, I said. He's not done yet. He's still got Aunt One and the Geis. God forbid, he may be going after everyone who knows of his involvement. That's the psychic and her sister. Maybe even. Oh God, maybe even Kim. Riley, Isaac said. I think I know where his next target is. I looked at him, confused. He was staring at a newspaper that was on the bench on the other side of Roderick. The article was circled with the title, Geist Throw Party in Honor of Dead Carlisle. The guest list is set to include prominent members of the community, including the entire Geist family. Some invitees include famed director Riley Lawrence. "Aw shucks," I said. And rising star actress Kimberly Madison. "Kimberly," I said. Off-screen. Somehow, blood rushed into my ears, and all I saw was white. Then we weren't there anymore. Isaac was still next to me, but we were somewhere else altogether. We were at my house. Carousel was keeping us on a tight spectral leash. I could see Aunt One, Cassie, Kimberly, Ramona, and Bobby in the house. Bobby's dogs had made a presence there and spread their toys all about. My character's shoes were destroyed. We just lost some time, I said. The plot cycle jumped forward. Where it had been in the middle of rebirth, it was now a few clicks away from second blood. What are we supposed to do? Isaac asked. Next scene, I said. We have to guide them in the right direction. What's the right direction? Isaac asked. Not sure. We were in a dilemma. Our characters knew that Roderick was attacking the manor party. That wasn't news to Aunt One and the others. We just had to warn them in character, no big deal. That wasn't the problem. Despite the upcoming danger, we needed them to go to the manor party because that was the next big scene. That was second blood, almost certainly. We could try to tell them that Roderick will be there, and they need to take the flask from him, I said. It does seem like the spirit has to be summoned from nearby, and we need them to get the flask. That was the only way to save lives. Take the flask and throw it in a river. Flash forward to the centennial. It's a piece of cake. The problem was, how were we supposed to convey that to the others? Luckily, this had been a very long storyline, and I had said lots of things I could repeat to them using flashback revelation. The trop didn't require me to have said it on screen as long as I didn't expect the audience to see the flashback. Let's give it a go, I said. We walked through the walls of my home, and as soon as we did, Bobby's dogs started going nuts. What's going on over there? Aunt One yelled, trying to be heard over the baying of hounds. Hush, Carmen. Whiskey, shhhh, Bobby said fiercely. Carmen and Whiskey were the most annoying dogs. I didn't even know which one was which, only that Carmen barked because Whiskey barked, and then Whiskey barked because Carmen barked, and so on and so forth. I decided to activate flashback revelation. The trop ran on Savvy, which I had my fair share of. That meant I should have a few uses of it, but I didn't want to waste any of them. I needed to let them know it was us and that we were ready to make a plan. I started thinking about what I wanted to say, and little plaques with phrases came onto the red wallpaper. I was going to choose, "I'm here with you," but before I could, I heard screaming. "They're back!" Cassie screamed. Wait, was she looking at us? "Riley and Isaac are here," she said even louder. "Look at the red wallpaper. You can see their posters." Of course. The red wallpaper. Players were able to see other players with more ease than seeing enemies. You could see a fellow player on the red wallpaper even in pitch blackness as long as you had a line of sight. While at your base, you could even see a fellow player through walls. Apparently, you could see them even if they were specters. "Oh, my God," Kimberly said as she rushed into the kitchen where we had appeared. "Riley? I'm here with you," I said, Using flashback revelation. Did you hear that? Cassie asked. Antoine and Kimberly had. They were around when I had said it previously. Ramona, who wandered into the kitchen, could neither hear the echo of my voice nor see me on the red wallpaper. Riley and Isaac are back, Kimberly said, gesturing over toward me and Isaac. Ramona was incredulous, to say the least. I thought about using a flashback to confirm I was here, but I had basically already wasted one already. What do we do? Isaac asked. The world's worst game of charades, I suggested jokingly. You never know what things you should discuss before a storyline. In retrospect, it seemed obvious that we should have some kind of code for talking to each other while ghosts, but we had not taken the time for such a contingency. Luckily, none of us were dummies. Antoine had an idea. We could do yes and no questions, he said. For yes, stand over there, he said, pointing to one wall. For no, over there. He pointed to the other wall. That worked. I wondered if it would be worth it to try the bell from Reply the Deeper did, but I had no way of suggesting it. And so the planning began. Riley, Kimberly asked. Are we still going to the party? I stopped for a second, having nearly forgotten which wall meant yes. I trotted over to the yes wall and stood. They followed me, making sure to see me on the red wallpaper. Yes, Antoine said. That's what we thought. We just don't know why our characters would go near the place where our deaths are certain. What do we say? He had nailed down our dilemma. Luckily, I had spoken about the flask before. I decided to use a flashback on Kimberly. When she had first appeared, I had explained things to her very carefully. There's this flask, like a flask you would drink each out of, that is used to summon a terrible spirit, I said. My voice echoed. Only Kimberly and I could hear it. He's talking about the flask, Kimberly said. We need to go for the flask, I think, is what he's saying. Antoine nodded his head. Gray has the flask. He's going to use it at the party. We need to get the flask and throw it in a river, he said, putting together all of the things we knew about the flask. I moved over to the wall. That lines up with what we kind of knew, he said. Now, how do we get our characters to know that? Instead of answering yes or no, I moved over toward the red hand chair where Cassie was sitting. She glanced up at me and said, "Oh, of course. Just have the psychic have a vision. What would you all do without me?" It was simple. Isaac and I could spend hours trying to show them on screen what we are supposed to do, or we can talk to the psychic and have her say it. How many times were we going to use that trick without consequences? Psychics really are the saviors of lazy writers. Tope continued. Thanks for listening.